Would Neanderthals have survived the Cretaceous period? The world that Neanderthals once inhabited was vastly different from the age of dinosaurs. Neanderthals, who lived thousands of years ago, were skilled survivors in harsh Ice Age environments. But what if they had found themselves transported millions of years back in time, to the Cretaceous period, when massive dinosaurs ruled the Earth? Would they have managed to adapt and survive? Could their intelligence, hunting abilities, and tool-making skills have given them an edge? Or would they have been overwhelmed by a world filled with colossal, deadly predators? It's a question worth pondering. The history of the Cretaceous. The Cretaceous period was a time of intense biological diversity, lasting from about 145 million to 66 million years ago. Dinosaurs were at their peak, dominating nearly every land ecosystem. If you imagine your lifetime being around 100 years, that feels significant, but stack 100 lifetimes together to get 10,000 years, then multiply that by 100, and you reach a million. Now consider that dinosaurs existed for nearly 200 million years before their sudden extinction, an incomprehensibly long span compared to the relatively short existence of Neanderthals. At the beginning of the Cretaceous, Earth was a very different place. Large land masses were still shifting due to plate tectonics. The supercontinent Pangaea had already begun to split into separate continents, forming the early versions of what we recognize today. The climate was warm and humid, with no polar ice caps, making it ideal for the growth of dense forests and lush vegetation. Life flourished. It was an era where giant reptiles roamed freely, and the competition for survival was intense. Neanderthals, on the other hand, were accustomed to a more temperate, often freezing environment. They thrived during the Ice Age, using their powerful build and sharp minds to hunt large mammals such as mammoths and woolly rhinos. Unlike dinosaurs, Neanderthals were warm-blooded and had learned to create clothing, build shelters, and start fires, but none of these survival skills would have prepared them for the challenges of the Cretaceous world. If Neanderthals were suddenly transported to the Cretaceous period, the first thing they would notice is how unfamiliar and dangerous their surroundings would be. Unlike the Ice Age landscapes of Europe and Asia, the Cretaceous was a tropical world filled with towering ferns, massive conifers, and vast swamps. It was teeming with life, but life that was entirely alien to anything they had ever seen. The air would be warm and heavy with humidity, the forests thick and impenetrable, and the sounds of enormous creatures moving through the underbrush would be constant. Dinosaurs were the dominant life forms of the time. Predators like the terrifying Tyrannosaurus rex, with its bone-crushing bite, and swift, pack-hunting raptors roamed the land. Herbivores like Triceratops and Hadrosaurs could reach massive sizes, while smaller creatures like early mammals scurried about in search of food and shelter. Neanderthals, despite being formidable hunters, would have found themselves vastly outmatched by the sheer size and power of the creatures around them. Their tools, stone-tipped spears and hand axes, would have been nearly useless against something like a T-Rex or even a smaller predator like Deinonychus. The tactics they used to hunt Ice Age animals simply wouldn't apply in a world where a single swipe from a dinosaur's tail could send them flying. The dense vegetation would have made it difficult to spot predators before it was too late, and their usual hunting strategies would have left them vulnerable to ambush. However, it wasn't just the predators that would have posed a threat. The climate itself could have been just as deadly. Neanderthals were built for colder environments, with stocky bodies that conserved heat. In the Cretaceous, where temperatures were consistently warm, they would have struggled to regulate their body temperature. Heat exhaustion and dehydration would have been constant risks, especially since their bodies weren't adapted to such extreme conditions. Could Neanderthals adapt? Despite the overwhelming challenges, it's possible that some Neanderthals could have adapted, at least for a short time. They were incredibly resourceful and had a keen ability to observe and learn from their environment. Given enough time, they might have figured out ways to avoid the most dangerous predators and exploit less obvious food sources. Perhaps they could have focused on gathering plants, fruits, and seeds, relying less on hunting large prey. If Neanderthals had any hope of surviving in the Cretaceous period, they would have had to rely on their intelligence, adaptability, and ability to work together. Unlike the apex predators of their time, such as saber-toothed cats and cave bears, Neanderthals were not solitary hunters. They operated in groups, communicating and coordinating during hunts, which gave them an edge over Ice Age animals. However, in a world dominated by dinosaurs, their usual tactics would have needed drastic modifications. One of the biggest challenges would have been shelter. Neanderthals were accustomed to using caves for protection from the elements and predators, but in the Cretaceous, suitable cave systems would have been scarce. Instead, they might have been forced to build more elaborate structures using wood and vegetation, much like early Homo sapiens did in later millennia. Given their advanced tool-making skills, they could have constructed strong, elevated platforms in trees or hidden shelters in dense forests to keep away from large ground-dwelling predators. Neanderthals were also skilled fire makers, and fire Fire might have been their best defense against Cretaceous predators. While fire would not have stopped a rampaging T-Rex, it could have been useful in deterring smaller carnivores like Dinosaurs, which relied on ambush tactics. Fire also would have allowed them to cook meat, making food easier to digest and reducing the risk of disease from eating raw prey. However, the thick, humid, jungle-like environment of the Cretaceous would have made fire maintenance challenging, especially with the frequent storms that plagued the period. The biggest shift for Neanderthals in the Cretaceous would have been their approach to food. They were skilled big-game hunters in the Ice Age, but there were no woolly mammoths or bison in the Cretaceous. Hunting dinosaurs would have been near impossible with the weapons they had. Instead, they would have had to adapt to hunting much smaller prey, such as early mammals, small reptiles, and even large insects. Fishing could have been an essential survival strategy. The Cretaceous was home to large rivers and lakes filled with fish, amphibians, and even early crocodilians. Neanderthals were known to have fished during their time in Ice Age Europe, so this skill could have transferred well to their new environment. They might have developed spears specifically designed for fishing, or even used simple traps to catch aquatic creatures. Foraging would have been another key survival tactic. The Cretaceous had an abundance of plant life, including ferns, cycads, and some of the first flowering plants. However, not all of these plants would have been edible. Many prehistoric plants were toxic, and it would have taken trial and error for Neanderthals to determine what was safe to eat. They were known to have had some understanding of medicinal plants, so it's possible they could have learned which Cretaceous flora were beneficial and which were deadly. Aside from predatory dinosaurs and environmental challenges, Neanderthals would have faced another deadly threat: disease. The Cretaceous was home to a vast array of bacteria and parasites that their immune systems would have had no experience fighting. Mosquitoes and other blood-feeding insects were already present, meaning Neanderthals could have been exposed to ancient diseases that modern scientists know little about. The warm, humid climate would have also made infections from injuries much more dangerous. Unlike Ice Age Europe, where freezing temperatures helped reduce bacterial spread, the Cretaceous was a perfect breeding ground for infections. A simple cut or wound could have quickly turned fatal without proper treatment. Neanderthals had some understanding of wound care. As evidence suggests, they used primitive medicine, but it is unlikely they would have had the knowledge to combat the prehistoric diseases of the time. In the end, Neanderthals, despite their intelligence and adaptability, would have struggled immensely in the Cretaceous period. The extreme climate, abundance of giant predators, and completely unfamiliar food sources would have made long-term survival nearly impossible. While they may have been able to last for a short time by hiding, foraging, and adapting their hunting techniques, they would have always been at a severe disadvantage in a world dominated by dinosaurs. In the grand scheme of history, Neanderthals were some of the toughest and most resilient hominins to have ever lived. However, even their impressive strength, intelligence, and survival skills would not have been enough in the Cretaceous. The sheer number of challenges, massive predators, unfamiliar food sources, disease, climate extremes, and the lack of safe territory would have made survival nearly impossible. Unlike their Ice Age environment where they could carve out a place for themselves, the Cretaceous was already dominated by creatures far more powerful than them. Even if they had managed to persist for a short time, their population would have declined rapidly due to constant threats. Without the ability to develop more advanced technology or quickly adapt to the changing environment, they would have ultimately been wiped out. Neanderthals were survivors, but the world of dinosaurs was simply not one they were built for.